Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's SANS webcast, a sneak peek at the new ICS 410. My name is Carol Auth of the SANS Institute, and I'll be moderating today's webcast. Today's featured speaker is Justin Searle, SANS instructor. If during the webcast you have any questions for our presenter, please enter them into the questions window located on the GoToWebinar interface at any time. Please note that this webcast is being recorded, and a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. And with that, I'd like to hand the webcast over to Justin.
Thanks, Carol. So everybody, welcome to getting a sneak peek at the new ICS 410. It's been, almost exactly 5 years ago since myself, the ICS curriculum at SANS, and my two co-authors that originally helped me write ICS 410 started designing the course and started writing the course. So it's definitely been a fun 5 years, and over those 5 years, we definitely have reached a couple different goals that we are quite proud of. So the first off, just kind of to give you guys a sneak peek into a little bit of the history that we've had here with ICS 410. So we officially launched the first beta of the course in December of 2013, and then it was February at the ICS Security Summit in Orlando where we did the first official launch. And we had generated so much interest during the beta process and from people hearing about us writing the course. We had over 100 people actually enrolled in the first offering of the course. In fact, it was so much that about 2 months before we had the course, SANS actually called me up and asked me if I had another week free, and we actually broke the attendees into 2 weeks. And I ended up teaching ICS 410 the week before the conference, as well as the week after the conference. So it was a long 2 weeks of ICS teaching for me. But yeah, it was a great launch, and we've had a lot of success since then. Over those 5 years, especially during that first year, it was one of the fastest of all the SANS conferences or courses that we had. And we've also have the GICSP, and some of you on this call may actually have your GICSP. We do have DoD 8570 approval now for the GICSP course, which is very important for any of the government employees looking at becoming certified. And speaking about certifications, we are almost at the 2,000 mark for 2,000 GICSP certified individuals. I just checked it earlier today, and I think we're right around 1,850 or something like that, about halfway to 1,900 right now. So doing pretty good there. And over those last 5 years, we definitely don't keep our content stale here at SANS. We've had eight different updates to ICS 410 in the last 5 years, so staying true to what we generally do at SANS, about 2 updates per year. So we definitely haven't stayed stagnant, but at the same time, every now and again we just need to do a more than major update. Traditionally at SANS we have 1 major and 1 minor update every single year for every course. And for those of you that's ever written a book, that's like trying to do an update of your 1,000-page book once you add all those days to be able to do those updates. But this time around, we have chosen to do something a little bit larger than that major update. And that's what we're going to be getting into today. But before we do that, just wanted to call out, if any of you have taken the course before, I just wanted to make sure that everybody knows about the ICS forums that SANS has. Sometimes we're not as good as instructors at telling everybody about our ICS forum. So if you work in the ICS space or are interested in learning more about the ICS space, we do have a Community ICS forum that you can go ahead and enroll in. You can find that at ics-community.sans.org. Go there, and it's an online forum where you will get email updates if you choose to enable that, to let you know when there's discussions going on. But the primary discussions are actually done inside of the web forums themselves. So we have some pretty good conversations going on in that ICS forum every single week. So lots of people there to be able to answer questions, help people understand what's going on, even if you're a new person in the industry, or even if you're somebody that's been in the ICS industry for your whole life. Definitely a lot of people there willing to help answer questions or share insights and how their own organizations have tackled some of the defenses inside of ICS. So that's kind of a history and where we're at now. Let's talk about where we're going with ICS 410, and most importantly, what is this new update that we just barely launched? In fact, we're teaching the second run of it this week in Colorado. So this 2018 major update that we've done, to give you kind of a nice summary, has 33% new content, which includes more labs. We also went through, I went through and rewrote about 33% of the content as well. So we did end up having some of the slides that had minor updates over the years, just really needed to be approached in a different way, trying to give new insight or try to focus on newer technologies or newer information that's come out or ideas that have come out over the years. And so that's now reflected. So you're looking at a very large percentage, about 2/3 of the course has had major revisions and major updates. In fact, every time I submit an update, I get a report back that gives me a diff of all the changes, and that was quite the bloody diff that had a lot of red marks all over the place for all the changes that took place. Part of that update also consisted of a restructuring of the course. So at least the topics of how we presented the topics and approached the topics. So that primarily affected days 2 through 4, and I'll show you in a little bit kind of an overall map of how things got shuffled around on those days. We have updated both the virtual machines with completely new versions. So that's kind of a nice addition for all the students. We've gone through and we've mapped every single section of all the attacks and all the defenses and all the breakdowns of the technologies to 5 different cybersecurity frameworks, because one cybersecurity framework is not enough for everybody. So no matter which cybersecurity framework you've chosen, hopefully it is within the 5 we've mapped to, and if not, you definitely should be able to find some mapping to cross-map those for you to whatever you're doing. And then for those taking the GICSP, something that might be exciting for you is we now have a new index of all 5 books. So when you take the updated course, you will get a 6th book, which is the index, and that will go through and map pages for all the different books that are there. So that's the major update that we have right now. And going forward into the next minor updates and the following major updates, some of the major goals that I personally have as the author for the course is trying to continue to shift the time to more labs and more hands-on and less time in lecture. That's always a constant struggle, especially when we have a GIAC exam that we have to make sure we're meeting all the objectives and covering all the content. But that's something that I think all of us as instructors are always constantly trying to do. Besides the fact that you guys enjoy the more labs, it's always nice for us instructors not to have to speak so much, because most of us really don't like being up there. So definitely check that out. Another thing that we are going to be working on future updates is we'll be taking all the labs outside of the lecture books and doing a separate lab book and changing the format. So that way kind of have a little bit more control over doing the walkthroughs of each of the exercises, so people will have a little better understanding of those books or of those exercises and the steps for those exercises. Now, as for content, so I mentioned that we have 33% new content. Here's kind of the overall map of those. So you can see the 5 different days on the slide. As you can tell, day 1 didn't have a lot of major updates to it. So if you've taken the course in the last year, there hasn't been a lot of changes in day 1, some minor additions. And the way you read this table, you'll see my little key at the very bottom of the slide. Anything that is just green text means that it's an existing section that we had before. However, we have done some major updates to the slides inside of that section. And anytime you see something that has a green background, so the block of text with green, that's an entirely new section that has all new content inside of it. So by kind of looking across the board, you kind of give it a better idea of what we actually have throughout the course. So you can see day 2. That day 2, 3, and 4, we had that reshuffling, which I'll go into a little bit later. But day 2 ended up getting a lot of new content that we had. It's no longer the attack day as what it was in the past. Really, day 2 is digging more down into the lowest levels of the ICS infrastructures. So for those in the industry, what we would generally say Purdue level 0 and level 1, that's really going to be the focus of the day 2 material. And within that, if we kind of look at some of the information that's here, kind of pointing out, I've kind of pulled out 3 new topics of interest to people maybe considering to take the course. The first one is we have an entirely new section on field bus, right? And so here's one of the slides that we actually have added to the field bus section. So this slide basically goes through and talks about the different field bus protocols and how the field bus protocols relate to another. So we've had several different IEC standards that go through and define exactly what field buses are, and I've gone through those standards and tried to map those based on not only the protocol families, but what each of the vendors and each of the other related IEC standards or other standards outside of IEC have actually mapped that to give people a better understanding of when we talk about field bus and the protocols at that lowest level of the ICS infrastructure in Purdue levels 0 and 1, which ones are serial-based protocols, which ones are Ethernet-based protocols, meaning that it sits directly in an Ethernet frame and doesn't have multiple layers or doesn't leverage TCP/IP. And then the third column goes through and talks about TCP/IP-based versions of that. And so you can kind of map them across. So if you were to go ahead and try to look at any of these, for instance, protocol family version 3, the third line down, Profibus would be the serial-based version. But if you look to see how the data is actually presented inside of that Profibus serial frame, that information is related to and has continued down the heritage into Profinet RT and IRT, which is an Ethernet-based protocol, as well as Profinet TCP/IP, which has that same information but inside of a TCP/IP-based frame. So that's kind of something fun to do, to kind of give people an overview of the lay of the land for field bus, which is very obscure to non-engineers some days. Related to that, we actually do have some new exercises. I mentioned we have a lot of new exercises. Here's actually a screenshot from one of those exercises. So we still have the Velocio PLCs, just like we have had for the last couple of years. I think we introduced the Velocio PLCs about 3 years ago. Over that time, we've kind of added new exercises, and the new exercise we've added for the PLC this time is to explore its serial-based capabilities. Something that PLC had was a Modbus RTU, or a serial version of Modbus that was available on that PLC. And we now have implemented that inside of the class, and we go through and do an exercise where we interact with that serial-based protocol, as well as capture that serial-based protocol and do some dissections with Wireshark of the raw serial traffic. So that's something that's kind of something fun for people that's never tried to capture serial communications, especially field bus communications. Another topic that we actually have that we've introduced into the course is another section, or I should say a section of a section, kind of a subsection of safety and different types of safety devices and protection equipment. So we had mentioned it before, but we didn't really have a ton of information inside of the course, and we hadn't really addressed a lot of the new capabilities in the safety systems and how the safety systems in some of the newest equipment have been integrated into the controllers themselves. So now we have a section that goes through and talks about what does a traditional safety system look like when you have a safety system that's physically separate than the controller themselves, and how does that compare to the newer safety technologies where you have a safety system integrated into the controller, right? And we talk about all the benefits from a technical perspective and a business perspective in merging those two together, but we also try to be very realistic about what were some of the negative aspects or some of the disadvantages that creates for cybersecurity and defending our systems, right? So that's a new section that we have inside of the course. So it kind of gives you a little bit of a highlight or a peek inside of some of those new sections. If you were to you go back to that original when I had all the new green sections, you notice there was another big green block at the beginning of day 5. Just verbally, I don't have a slide on it, but wanted to call that out as well. We had talked about ICS security governance on day 5 before, and we had talked about different types of strategies, but we never really did tie ourselves to a framework. We had used NERC SIP as examples for cybersecurity regulation, but we didn't really present a framework to try to help guide people in designing or creating that cybersecurity program inside your organization. And after looking at all the different options, we did end up deciding to go through and do an introduction of some of those, specifically going into IEC 62443, which is actually one of the biggest standards that this whole course and the GICSP is actually founded on. But specifically for something that's a little bit more approachable and available to organizations internationally, we did we did add a section in there specifically going into more depth about how to create an ICS security program based around the NIST cybersecurity framework, right? And then once again, of course, mapping that back to the IEC 62443 for those organizations that want to do those mappings. So as for the restructure, traditionally how we've had the course over the last 5 years, we've had the overall structure of the course pretty much the same. The first day was kind of an overview of ICS to try to help IT people and people without engineering backgrounds understand what this new world of ICS is. And then day 2 would be the attack day, where we help all the engineers and the people with ICS backgrounds that don't have a strong cybersecurity background, kind of help them understand what are some of the vulnerabilities and the way people attack us. And then we'd go into day 3 and day 4 for defenses. So it was overview day 1, attack day 2, day 3 was defenses of workstations and servers, and day 4 was defenses of network communications and devices. One of the big challenges we had with that is we ended up having to go through the entire technology stack inside of the control systems multiple times. We'd go through it all the first day to give people an overview, then we'd do it all again the second day to give people an understanding of where the attacks are, right? So working from the PLCs all the way in up to the master servers at the highest levels of our control networks. And then we'd have to do it again when we get into the defenses. So I've taken days 2, 3, and 4 and kind of have shuffled and reorganized how that information was presented. And then, of course, added the new material that's there. And sorry about the weird way this slide is actually laid out. It was the best way I could actually make this work for inside of the original document where all these mappings were and with all these arrows. But if you look on the right-hand side, there's day 2, day 3, and day 4. On the upper left, so if you kind of turn your head to the right, the upper part of the slide is the original course, and the lower half is going to be the new updated course, so where all the green is. And you'll be able to see the arrows kind of pointing where things get mapped. So some of the information in day 2, you see 3 different sections that did actually stay in day 2, but more of those sections, most of those sections from day 2 ended up getting pulled down into day 3 and day 4. So to kind of give you a better understanding of how we're laid out now is we basically, after we do the overview on day 1 starts at controllers and sensors and actuators at the lowest level, and then kind of slowly build our way up into the higher levels of our control systems that look more IT-like. We then go ahead and do the same thing across day 2 and day 3 and day 4, where day 2 we're focusing on those lowest levels, the things that are, the new and the unique things inside of control networks, the things that IT people haven't been exposed to, or the devices that have more unique challenges or defenses that are different than what we can generally do inside of the IT environment. So by doing this, we're staying more ICS focused during the first half of the course, and then kind of slowly working our ways back up to the higher levels of our control network that are more IT-like, right? And that definitely, I think, has really helped so far as we've run the course. People kind of understand that flow and understand more of the uniqueness of ICS, especially considering the fact that we've now dug into and provided a lot more content around level 0 and level 1 of that Purdue model of the controllers and the actuators and all the fun things we find down there in the lower realms. And then day 3, we get into kind of the Purdue level 2, where we get into HMIs and historians, and then into day 4, we end up getting back up to Purdue level 3 and the perimeter to our control networks. How do we do remote access into the ICS environment? How do we do DMZ environments to be able to limit the control or limit the flow of data between our control networks and the enterprise? themselves. Now, as for the new virtual machines, I did mention we have 2 new virtual machines inside of the course. So when we originally started the course, we ended up only having 1 single virtual machine, and that was the Samurai STFU, or Samurai Security Testing Framework for Utilities. And we use that distribution to be able to go ahead and kind of model some of the different attacks and to do forensics and explorations of looking at what some of those attacks are, or some of the communication looks like. But then about halfway, it was about 2.5 years ago, maybe 2 years ago, we added a Windows 10 virtual machine to the course. So that way we could talk to and also practice doing some of the defenses on those Windows machines. Because when you look at the ICS environment, we have a lot of Windows machines, and especially in the higher ends, it's primarily Windows based. Then we get into the lower ends, we end up getting more embedded Linux or some of the other real-time operating systems that are down those lower areas. So we added Windows 10, but there was some restrictions allow us to really do what I wanted to do at the time, and we ended up with Windows 10 Home Edition, which was great. We could practice some of the defenses. However, Home Edition by Microsoft is fairly crippled with the security features. And so there was a lot of things that we wanted to cover in the course and give people the chance to practice inside of Windows 10 that we couldn't do with Windows 10 Home Edition. So we are officially now upgrading to the latest Windows 10 Enterprise, and we are actually on the Redstone 3, or the 1709 release of Windows 10. So that is the latest version of Windows 10, to make sure that the knowledge we teach you today is definitely applicable for tomorrow as long as we possibly can make it. So, and the benefits of doing that is we now have the ability to do some of those advanced security defenses. For instance, we can now go ahead and create audit rules inside of Windows, where we couldn't do that before with Home Edition, right? So we had previously talked about how do you deal with logs, and we verbally spoke to how would you go through and actually change the audit logs. Now we can get more into more granular detail and talk more details about that, and students will now have a virtual machine that they can practice on. Another feature that we had that we didn't have before was the ability to use defenses like App Locker and Device Guard, which are some of the newer defenses that we have, which are amazingly strong and powerful for their capabilities, and definitely something we need to consider as a valid defense inside of our environments, especially environments that we can't patch and we can't change once we go into production, or have very limited capabilities of patching or changing those on very long time frames, right? Technologies like App Locker and Device Guard are a perfect match for those environments. App Guard is Microsoft's whitelisting solution that's included for free inside of Enterprise. So if you can get to the point where you harden your ICS equipment as you are doing the initial site acceptance test before you go into production, right? And you get it locked into production with a whitelist in place that only the executables that the engineers have designed and have approved actually can run on the box. That definitely gives you a lot stronger capability than trying to deal with something like antivirus, where you have to update, which we can update on some of those machines, right? So that gives us a lot of great capabilities to dig more into some of those very strong defenses we can take advantage of. As for Samurai STFU, that is an open source project that I have been running for the last 5 years, and that project has officially been replaced with a new project. Really, it's just a complete ground up rebuild and a name change. There was a lot of confusion between some other distributions I did in the web pen testing world for Samurai WTF, the web testing framework, since everybody always gets those acronyms messed up with unfortunate acronym collisions out there. But the new distribution is called the Control Things platform. Some of the major changes there, as I mentioned, is a complete rebuild from the ground up. It's now based on Debian testing, which means it's a rolling distribution where you can constantly get updates on a daily basis of anything that's on that distribution, as well as having the Kali repositories. And that was one of the big reasons why I wanted to base it on Debian testing, is because that's what Kali is based on, which then allows me to have the Kali repositories included inside of the distribution. So if you're missing a tool, you can go ahead and apt-get your favorite tool from the Kali repository, right? Amazing work that those guys do. So we can kind of take advantage of that. Another feature that we have that we've done across all of the sections starting on day 2 is anytime we talk about attacks or defenses, we now have at the beginning of every single section a list of the applicable standards, right? And we've mapped to 5 different standards, and you can see here is this kind of an example slide. In the section where we talk about the Purdue level 0 and level 1 defenses, the applicable standards are right there, right? So NIST CFS or CSF is the NIST cybersecurity framework that I mentioned that we do map or that we go into detail for how to use and how to adopt that on day 5. We go into ISA and IEC 62443 and how those will actually map to them and some of the different documents and versions that are there. We go into ISO and IEC 27001 for those organizations that choose to map to 27001. We go into the NIST's SP 853, which a lot of companies up to this point may have linked to or connected to over time. And COBIT 5 we also go into as well to help people understand for those that are trying to map to COBIT. So kind of give people a wide variety of cybersecurity frameworks and how you map. So that way, every time you get into any of the sections of the course, if you currently have some type of a cybersecurity framework or you're trying to do that after you finish the course, you'll be able to go back and hopefully very easily map each of the sections back to each of the standards that you're trying to follow. And finally, for those that are preparing for the GICSP or will be preparing for the GICSP, so if any of you have coworkers or employees that are looking at going through the program or in the course anytime soon, we now do provide that extra 6th book, as I mentioned, which is the index. And here's kind of a little snippet of 2 of the pages, basically going through and taking all the different terms and defenses and the ICS equipment and protocols, putting them inside of this index and mapping them to which books and page on those books. So if you kind of look into detail, 2:, so if I was to go ahead and look at that very first line, oops, see if I can get my mouse back here. There we go. So on this very first line, this app locker line, you can see that it's 4:23. Basically 4 stands for book 4. :23 means it's on page 23 of book 4. So that's now included automatically inside of the course. So if you want to build your own indexes, we have a starting point for you. Now you can go ahead and kind of dig that even deeper and do whatever you need to do that helps you study best for the course themselves. And that's kind of all I have for you is kind of as the summary of what we actually have. Before we give you guys a chance to do some questions and answers, I just wanted to call out 2 different ICS events that we do have coming up. So in Europe, we do have our ICS Summit, European Summit, that's going on here in just a couple of weeks. So on June 18th in Munich, we do have that European Summit for ICS. So if you are listening to this from Europe and you're interested in attending an ICS Summit, definitely go check that out. And here in the United States, of course, most people know about the Orlando Summit that we have, but we do have an annual ICS Summit inside of Houston, focusing more on oil and gas because of the strong oil and gas organizations that exist there in Texas. So that is coming up. The summit is going to be on October 1, and that is a dedicated summit with presentations. And then we have trainings going on from October 2nd to October 6th. So check that out if anybody is interested. And with that, I'll go ahead and open it up for questions for anybody that has a question for me or the updated course.
All right, thanks for that great presentation. We do have a question ready for the Q&A. However, if anyone has a question for Justin, please enter it into the questions window now. Our first question is, how quickly is the exam updated versus the class? Is the update considered complete then? All forward-going trainings and exams?
Very good question. So the update for the exam does follow fairly quickly. I know that as I do a major update, there's about a 3 to 4 month period as we go through quality control, have teams work through all the exercises, have copy editors go through all the books and catch all of my errors and typos, as I'm sure I probably had some in this slide deck since I didn't have anybody to go through them for me for the WebExes. But during that same time period, we do have the GIAC team that goes through the course and tries to realign the questions to the course. So they start writing new questions and adding those new questions. As for when they're actually released, since I'm actually firewalled off, I'm not allowed to see those test banks or be a part of that process because of our ANSI accreditations. I don't know exactly when they go live. So I believe that is usually fairly close to when the course go lives, or within a couple months following that time period. So if you have previously taken the course in the last couple months and you are getting ready to take it, probably, I doubt many of you will see any of the new questions. Anybody taking the new update, you'll probably have some of the older questions and not get the newer questions initially for the first month or two, but there should be a minimal layover between those two. So if you have the old version, you really probably don't get the new questions. New people don't usually, have to worry too much about the older questions. So the good news is, even though it's a major update, as I mentioned, we have a lot of new content. And so that's going to be one of the bigger probably issues, but until they get the questions out, I don't think it's much of an issue. Carol, do you have any feedback on that? I know that you maybe have a different perspective, as you may be able to see this question before or hear from other instructors.
I'm sorry, I don't have anything to add to that.
I try. That's the problem with having just the instructors together here trying to do this presentation. But that is a good question, and I haven't ever heard complaints in the past. So go ahead.
Okay, we do have another question though. If I buy OnDemand now, do I get the new 410 curriculum?
If you buy OnDemand now, no, the new OnDemand curriculum is not updated. In fact, that's what I was doing before this call and after this call, is finishing recording that new OnDemand curriculum. So probably the best way to find that out is maybe to contact the OnDemand team to find out when that is going to go live. I imagine that I'll have the recordings into them by the end of this week. And so I imagine probably by July 1, it will be live. But if you do have any questions, definitely please reach out to the OnDemand team and ask them if there's any way you could get the newer content, or just kind of hold off to do the acquisition until the July timeframe. But the OnDemand team will have the finite dates from them. And of course, they're waiting for me to get their updates to them. But I will have those recordings to them by the end of this week.
All right, thanks. So someone asks, are the updated slides going to be made available on the ICS community site? I did let the group know that a copy of the slides and recording of this webcast will be available for viewing later today and can be found on the SANS registration page. However, I don't know, Justin, if you have a specific answer to that question.
So the slides to the presentation of today definitely is going to be made publicly available, that you can get. The new updated slides to the course, for those that have previously had it, unfortunately SANS does not allow us to share those. However, because my hands are tied, sometimes as an author I try to maybe push some of the boundaries a little bit. So keep your eyes open for the future. You may end up seeing some WebExes coming up, in the next 6 months to a year that have to do with ICS 410. And if it's me giving the presentation, I always try to slide in some of the new slides where I possibly can. So I slid in a couple for you today into this presentation, and that's about the best I can do as an author because of the limitations I'm under.
All right, thanks, Justin. That's all I see. Do you have anything further you'd like to add?
No, other than that, if you guys are taking the course, definitely feel free to reach out to us. There's about 5 of us frequently teaching the course, and I think about 8 to 10 certified instructors that can teach the course. So if anybody has any questions, reach out to any of us instructors that are teaching the course, or if you really want to reach out to me as author, I actually provide you my information. That is my personal email address. Feel free to use it if you have any personal questions about the course.
Oh, and we just had one more come in.
Okay.
He says, hey, Justin, I took the ICS 410 course last August in your hometown and followed up with passing the GICSP. Really enjoyed the course. I could have really used the index when I took the exam. I spent hours creating my own. The student who wished to take the exam should really appreciate it. Question. Will the course include any tips on creating your own ICS lab?
Your own ICS lab. Oh, I thought you were going to create your own ICS index. Well, since I've done the hard work there.
It seems like we were headed that direction, but no.
Yeah, I know. Could you? Oh boy, I'm not. I'm kind of keeping that index up to date is going to be an interesting thing. Every single time I add a slide or remove a slide or change orders, it's going to be a nightmare. But yeah, as for creating your own ICS lab, that has been a huge challenge, honestly. That is something that myself over my career, trying to understand new technologies or new protocols that come out inside of ICS. One of the things I try to do is to get that equipment inside of my lab. And quite often it's cost prohibitive to do so, because you're almost always buying the equipment. And in order to get some of the newer protocols, you have to buy some of the bigger equipment, and you're dropping a couple $1,000s for a single piece of hardware to learn a protocol. So I don't have any great suggestions. So one thing I have constantly tried to do with Samurai STFU, and I'll continue to try to do with Control Things platform, is to create that distribution where we have as many simulators as we possibly can get to run, so you can have some type of a test lab to run the protocols. Be able to provide as many network captures, so you have some network captures of some of the ICS protocols, and you can at least use Wireshark to try to learn the protocols or understand how to look through those protocols. In fact, I think Control Things platform has 14 different ICS protocols now in it. In fact, if you want, you can go over to GitHub. Just do a search for Control Things platform on GitHub, and inside of there, you'll see a CT users project. Inside of CT users, I actually have a protocols folder, which actually has all those network captures. So you can go directly to GitHub to grab any of that information. But short of that, yeah, there's not a lot you can do in simulated environments inside of ICS without having contracts with the vendors themselves. So we don't have anything built in. If you do have any questions, I would say the best thing to do is probably just reach out to me privately, and I can try to answer any questions or give you some list of devices you can go ahead and look at that are fairly inexpensive, that will at least give you some type of a testing environment to go with. But like I said, it's not going to be comprehensive or all inclusive, because I haven't found a solution for that myself either.
All right, well, that's everything. Thank you so much, Justin, for your great presentation, which helps bring this content to the SANS community. To our audience, we greatly appreciate you listening in. For a schedule of all upcoming and archived SANS webcasts, including this one, please visit sans.org/webcasts. Until next time, take care, and we hope to have you back again for the next SANS webcast.
Thanks, everybody.